Hi there, 512 City. This afternoon, I've got a unique gift for you. I'm spending some time with Bishop Paul Ojeda, and I'm hoping I'm getting your surname right, Paul. But he's got an incredible story about the day he died 23 years ago. He had a drug overdose. And how does a guy with a drug overdose become a bishop? That's what we're going to find out in the next couple of minutes. But it's obviously part of our conversation around what's after ATX? What's afterlife? What does life after this life look like? You had an experience, Paul. Tell us about it.
Yes. So back in 1997, my wife and I met in a drug rehab. I tell people that I was bad, she was bad. Together we became worse. I tell people we went to AA, NA. We would have went to AAA. That's a tow truck company. They would have hauled us off. So we were bad. But in 1997, I had a cocaine overdose. And when I died, I didn't see a bright light. I actually saw a black tunnel. And it felt like somebody
Wow.
grabbed me and dropped me in this outer darkness. And I literally began to start to free fall like there was no end. You know, the Bible says in the book of Matthew, chapter 25 and verse 30, if I could read this to you, it says, "And cast the unprofitable servant into the outer darkness. There will be weeping and gnashing of the teeth." Prior to my near-death experience, I had never read the Bible. I was unaware that that was even in the Bible. There was such a place called the outer darkness. And that's exactly what it felt like to be cast into this outer darkness. And it felt like there was no end to it. It was just free falling for infinity. And I remember that I was no longer high. I knew exactly where I was. I knew that, and I don't know how to explain it, but I knew I was headed to hell. And in the midst of all that, I just thought, and that's exactly what it felt like. I just thought to myself, God, there's got to be a mistake, because I never killed anybody. I didn't rob anybody. As far as I was concerned, I was a really good person. The only person that I hurt was myself with my drug addiction. But it felt like as I tried to justify myself and how good I was, it started going faster. And so I started racing down this tunnel.
Wow.
Even faster.
Wow.
And it was at that moment that I cried out to the Lord.
So the tunnel is just darkness. It's just falling into this outer, deeper and deeper and deeper darkness.
You know, it is the darkest darkness that I could ever explain.
It's like the dream when you're falling, right? And you never hit the ground. Is that it?
Exactly. That's exactly
Wow,
what it is.
man.
It's just, and so, as I'm falling, I begin to cry out to the Lord with desperation. And all of a sudden, the Spirit of the Lord comes right next to me. And have you ever been in the dark and somebody's standing next to you? You can't see them, but you know they're there.
Yeah.
And that's what it felt like. I could feel the presence of God next to me. People often ask me, like, well, what did God look like? Or, and I didn't see him, but I felt him. I mean, I really felt his presence right beside me. And I'll never forget the words that he asked me. And it was, "Paul, what have you done with the life that I've given to you?" He didn't ask me how many times I've been to church, what church I went to, what my denomination was, if I tithe, none of that stuff. He just said, "Paul, what have you done with the life I've given to you?" And it was right then and there, I thought to myself, man, you better answer this right if you want to go back up. So here I am trying to figure out
No pressure, right? Falling into deep darkness here and all that.
what is the right answer. And I felt like God could read every motive, every thought, every intention. He knew my hidden agenda. There was nothing hidden before him. It was like he was looking with X-ray eyes and could see everything within my heart and my brain. And before I could even answer, my whole life flashes as big as the sky. And everything I did in secret and open, I mean, it did not miss a beat. And so people have often said, how do you know that that was God? Well,
Well, I mean, just another question. I mean, you didn't have a reference of this, right? Because what you're telling me here, it's this is Bible talk, buddy. This is the type of stuff we, I grew up in Sunday school. I wasn't bad enough for AAA to tow me away. The fact of the matter is, I was told these things and about outer darknesses and about your life flashing before your eyes and these things. I have a reference. You didn't grow up in church.
No, I did not.
Not at all.
I grew up passing the church. My mom and dad grew up Catholicism. They were Catholics. And so I told you, we were bad Catholics. We were drive-by Catholics. We just did the sign of the cross as we passed by. So I was just a drive-by Christian.
So yeah, none of these references. And so obviously people are asking you, how do you know that it was God and not just something of your imagination?
Yeah, absolutely.
What proves that it was God?
So prior to this, I had never read the Bible, but the reason that I knew it was God, because you and I and everyone has secrets that has happened that nobody knows, that are in our heart, and those secrets are buried. And so when all that was exposed, I knew that was God, because only God could know those things. And so it was obvious that God was exposing everything right before my very eyes. And so what I realized in that dark tunnel was I had lived for me, myself, and I. That was my Trinity.
That's it.
I realized that I was a selfish man.
The unholy Trinity, I guess.
There you go. I was a selfish man, a prideful man, an arrogant man. And I, even though I knew God, I didn't acknowledge God. And so it was a very shameful moment for me. I think the saddest moment is for a human being to stand before God and God say, I gave you life, and what did you do with it?
Wow.
And honestly, at that moment, he didn't want my bank account, my car, my house, or nothing. He wanted my life, my heart. And I realized that. I really realized that it was a relationship he wanted with me, and I had ignored him and rejected him this entire time. So I told the Lord, I said, God.
Paul, just before you get into that, you remind me of something that one of the other NDEs, near-death experience individuals that we spoke to this week said. Heidi Barr made a comment on Sunday during the 512 service when we interviewed her, and she said, I looked back at my body when I died, and it meant nothing to me. I could see my dead body, and as I left it, and my body meant nothing. I was looking over at my in her case, her sisters that was watching on, and she was concerned for them, but the dead body, she couldn't care less about it. And it sounds like you had a similar experience where suddenly the things that was dear to you, the things we fret about, the things we lose sleep about, the things we think we'll be worried about when we die, those things meant nothing in that moment.
They are rubbish. They matter nothing. And I want to tell you that this life is minute compared to the presence of God. And that's really what it was. It was just like, this everything that I put all my time, talent, and treasure into, it was for nothing. And so I realized that. And so I told the Lord, I said, God, you are just in sending me to hell, because today I recognize that I'm not good enough. As a matter of fact, everything about me is bad. But it's funny, but in that moment, I was no longer pleading for myself. I was pleading for everyone else. And so I told God, if you would just send me back so that nobody else comes this way, I would be happy. It's funny, but in the Bible, it talks about the rich man and Lazarus when he dies, and that's his request is, go back and tell all my brothers, least they come to this place. Yeah. And so I feel like when,
So even on your way to hell, you were less concerned about the fact that you were going to hell than other people in your life.
Yes, because that's how bad of a place hell is, that you don't want anybody going to that place. And, I think that it's funny, but my perspective of hell, because I think we've all heard of hell. Even if you don't go to church, you hear of hell. And people think, I'm living hell on earth. Well, that's not true. And I remember that my perception of hell was, I thought, well, if all the bad people or the drunks and the alcoholics go, I said, man, this is going to be so cool because all my friends are going to be there. We're going to have one big party. And, you know, it's going to
One
be
hell of a party, right?
one hell of a party. Exactly. And, you know, I'm serious, but I that was my perception, was like all the crazy people are going to go down here. We're just going to have a crazy time together. But the reality is that you'll be alone. There's no one around. And it is the most loneliest and emptiest place. It is the opposite. And there's something else, if I could add, that I do recall that stood out to me. It was a pulling away from the light, pulling away from the presence of God. So God is light and in him is no darkness. So I was literally pulling away from his presence. And what was funny was, in my darkest hour of my drug addiction and my sinful life, I thought that I was far from God, but God was still very near to me. It wasn't until I started making a journey to hell that I really began to experience what the separation from God really felt like. And that,
I mean, that's huge, because I mean, I don't know much of your story, but the little bit that we've spoken, it's clear that you were not living a godly church life before this moment 23 years ago. But the sense that in that, you know, depravity, doing drugs, being in some of the places that we would call, and not that I believe that they are, but we would call God-forsaken places in the world. What you experienced going from that life to hell was that distance of God suddenly happening. And I think that's somebody wants to find it to me by saying that, you know, heaven is the presence of God and hell is the absence of God, nothing more, nothing less. You know, so anything else is just coloring in that one thing. And what I love about what you're saying is that reinforces exactly that narrative, right? So it doesn't matter how dark it was, this was a darkness where there was no God.
That's right. Very well said. That's right. That's exactly what it was. And so, you know, people have often asked me, well, did you see demons and did you see scary faces and what was scary about it? If I could say the most scariest thing is understanding that you will be separated from God for eternity, not just for a weekend, not just for a day, but for eternity. And that is the most scariest thing that anybody, you know, it says that when Christ was on the cross, that he cried out, he said, Lord, why have you forsaken me? And the whole earth got dark. I think that darkness that I was experiencing, it's that darkness of God turning and saying, sin cannot abide with me. And so that was the scary part. It wasn't that hell was like Friday the 13th or, you know, demons and although I'm sure that if I would have kept going, it would have been really bad down there. But that was the scary.
That was nothing compared to the absence of God, which is darker than anything that can be depicted in any movie or any moment on earth. There's nothing as dark as the absence of God, because God is life and God is light. That's which is incidentally, I mean, every NDE or every person that has this near-death experience that we speak to says that God is light, God is life. And outside of him, there's a nothingness that cannot be explained through any, you know, bad scene of a demon or whatever. But Paul, 23 years ago, you have this experience, you cry out to God, and something happens in your life. But what's happening to your body at this point in time, right? So you had a drug overdose. This isn't just drug induced. You're a little high. Yeah. What's happening to your body at this point in time?
They had came and picked me up, put me in the ambulance. I was on the way to the hospital, and my wife, which was my girlfriend at that time, was in the back of the ambulance, and they lost me on the way down there. And so she was witnessing all this.
And you coded. You weren't almost dead. You were dead.
I was dead. I was gone. They lost me for a minute, and they had to revive me and bring me back. And so, but in all that, when God asked me that question and I spoke to him, it was almost like I finally said the right answer. And when I said, God, I just want to come back and tell the world that this stuff is real, that there's a heaven, there's a hell. and I don't want anybody to come to this place. And bam, I wake up and I got the IVs. I'm in the hospital. I look at Lillian and I said, Lillian, that Jesus that you've been telling me about, I found him. And I don't want religion and tradition and church. I want Jesus, the one that pulled me out of that hell. And I'm going to go find him. And Psalms 119, 105 says, your word is a lamp to my feet and a light to my path. And I literally opened the Bible and it began to illuminate like never before. Wow. And understand it. It went from logos to Rhema, and revelation took place. And I give credit to the Holy Spirit that gave me eyes to see and ears to hear. And it just changed my entire life. From that moment forward, if I could say, I was a plumber and an AC guy. I wasn't a preacher. I was a plumber and AC guy, and had no desire to be a pastor or anything like that.
Well, most people in Texas needs AC guys as much as they need, pastors. So we feel very similar about them. When we're in crisis, we really need your help.
Well, it's biblical. When they say go to the John, you're going to need a plumber. So, but I went back to plumbing. And everywhere that I went, I just began to share the gospel. And, every time God gave me an opportunity, I just tell people about Jesus. And
But I mean, so you're speaking to people, these aren't church people typically.
No.
Paul, what do you do if somebody, there's some people watching the stream right now, right? And they say, listen, you're at a high moment. This is just religion stuff, man. This is church stuff. I mean, how do you respond to that? How real are these things, and how do you know that it's real and it wasn't just a moment when you were high on drugs?
Because you can't take a Saul and make him a Paul. You can't take a man that was persecuted in the church and then make him a man that's passionate for the church. There's something, it says that we overcome the enemy by the blood of the Lamb and our testimony. And, you can argue theology and religion with me all day, but one thing you can't take from me is my experience. I know what I witnessed and I know what I saw, and nobody can explain that. And one thing that I have seen is if people experience that, you can't shake them. You can't move them. And so again, I would tell them that I was not a church going guy. I was, I told you this earlier that it's funny, but when God called me to be a pastor, I said, man, I think you picked the wrong guy, because most of the guys go, my dad was a pastor, my grandfather was a pastor. We were all growing to church growing up. And it's funny, but I remember as a kid, I used to tell my mom, like, hey, let's go to church, because everybody's going to church. She said, you don't need that stuff. We don't go to those places. And so I remember we just didn't go because that was our day. And so church was not something I did. But I will.
But you said something which is super powerful, Paul. You said that you can argue theology, you can argue all these things with me, but you can't argue with my experience. And I think that's sometimes the problem is we don't have an experience of God. We've got a theology, we've got a religion, but people don't have an experience, because a man with an experience is never at the mercy of an argument. That's because right. You've got an experience, but we don't have to die to have an experience. We can experience God and his power in ways that doesn't need us dying to do that. We can experience the relationship you're talking about. I mean, do you sense that since you've now walked with God, that you've had moments where you've experienced God in ways that are as real as that one moment 23 years ago that changed your life?
Absolutely. And let me just say this. When I was high and going through my mess and my dark times, I remember going to the church all coked up and lost, and sat at the back of the pew because I was looking for this Jesus to help me out. And, I didn't hear a thing, and I didn't feel a thing. And I remember the preacher preaching, and I sat there and I cried so hard. And when I walked out, I was like, I guess, God, you don't want to talk to me because I can't hear you. But the truth be told, I had not surrendered to the Lord. And the reality was, it wasn't that God didn't want to talk to me. It was, I wasn't ready to receive what he had to share with me, which was truth. And it wasn't till I died and I was headed to hell that I finally said, okay, God, I surrender. and I'm going to allow you to be God and me to be a child of God. And I think that you don't have to die from an overdose. You don't have to go and take a journey to hell. You can just, it's up to you once you're ready to surrender. Like the woman at the well that said, Jesus said, if you ask me for a drink, I'll give it to you. And so it's that easy. Whoever calls upon the name of the Lord shall be saved. So anyone can call on the Lord, a mother, a father, a daughter, a son, a brother, a sister, a coworker, wherever you're at, whether you've been in church or out of church, the Lord is waiting for you to call upon him.
That's great, Paul. Man, what a story. I can spend the whole afternoon with you, but we've got to wrap this up. So the world's on its head, right? It's COVID-19, it's craziness. I mean, we're people are figuring out how to get back from this, and we're weighing up economic realities versus safety realities, and it's this crazy world we live in right now. But given the crazy world we live in, what gives you hope? Why do you feel filled with hope and excited at this point in time, though the reality we're all facing is a little uncertain right now?
My hope is in Christ Jesus because, in the scriptures, in Revelations, he says, I am the Alpha and the Omega. I am the beginning and the end. He said, I am the author and finisher of your faith. And so what gives me hope, and that I know today, even looking way back then, that God is in control of all things, and he is leading and guiding the footsteps of those who surrender their will to him. And so this might be out of my control, but it's not out of my God's control. And I've already had a near-death experience to prove that even when I tried to die, he would not let me die. And even when I tried to give up, he picked me up. And so that is my peace. And I would just encourage everybody to say, maybe you didn't have time for God, but now God has given you that time. And now we understand that, what we thought was important is not as important. And so I would just challenge everybody to just open your word, your Bible, and seek God and allow him to be God. And I promise the peace that surpasses all understanding will guard your heart and your mind, and you'll be able to enjoy your time at the house.
That's awesome, man. And what an amazing word, that we don't have to go through what you went through in order to have what you have, because heaven, just like hell, is not a place, or it's not defined by the place. It's defined by the absence of God. Heaven is defined by the presence of God. And if heaven is defined by the presence of God, then that's an access that we have right now. We have access through Jesus Christ to the very presence of God. Heaven can come to earth in our self-isolation. That's awesome, man.
If I could add one last thing, and I could tell you, I know that now I'll be going to heaven, not because I'm perfect and I have done everything right, but because I put my faith and trust in Jesus, and my name's written in the Lamb's Book of Life. But I will tell you this, my journey to heaven now, and my goal is that I would not go alone. The only thing you can take to heaven is, you can't take your money, your cars, or your stuff on this earth. But one thing you can take is souls. And so it is my desire to touch as many souls with the gospel, so that many people will come to heaven. And so the next time I stand before the Lord, it will not be alone. It'll be with the very thing that he gave his son for, which is a harvest of souls. And I challenge everybody to likewise do the same. Go to heaven full of souls.
That's it, man. And that's exactly your prayer, wasn't it? When this happened, you said, God, I just don't want to go alone. Well, it has been a great privilege to spend some time with you, Paul. And thank you for sharing your story. And thank you for the great job you do. Austin Powerhouse Church, right? That's the name of the church.
That's correct.
So if you're watching the stream, go have a look at it. The drug addict that died, that became a pastor in our city. What a privilege it is for us to be a part of that. And what a great privilege it is for us as a city to do this series together. What's After ATX? We've got Don Piper with us Sunday morning at 10 o'clock as part of the Fartall City Church service. Don Piper will be sharing with us around, he's the subject of the movie 90 Minutes in Heaven. And he'll be joining us via Zoom on Sunday and actually sharing with us at Fartall City Church. So if you want to join us for another great story like the one you've just heard, feel free to join us for that. Thanks, Paul, for being with us, and thank you for joining us live on Facebook and YouTube this afternoon. We look forward to connecting with you again soon. Thank you so much.
God bless you, my friend.